Hello everyone, welcome to this lecture 4 of week 5 for our course Metrics and Analytics of Marketing. In the last session, we had an extensive discussions on how customers lifetime value is calculated. Basically, we mentioned that customers lifetime is all about the time frame that starts with the phase of somebody becoming aware about our brand and becoming a loyal customers from our brand. So, basically what the value is created during this particular period of time through various transactions are calculated in terms of present value and then used it for the purpose of evaluating whether acquiring the customer is worth it or not. But in this process, the story is half done, because the story itself starts with the customer acquisition phase. But there are a lot of activities which has happened before the customer being acquired. There are a lot of expenditure which has happened before the customer is actually acquired. So, in order to have a broader perspectives of how the business is doing, we need to look into the complete story. And that is why there is another metric which is on the similar line like customer lifetime value, but it is an extension of customer's lifetime value, which is called a prospect lifetime value. So, before having a better understanding of what is called prospect lifetime value, we need to differentiate between this term, that is prospect and customer. Basically, prospect is a person who is in the middle of the marketing or sales funnel that we have discussed in earlier session. Customer is someone who has purchased our product, who has already gone through this awareness, interest and consideration stage. So, they have already performed at least one transactions with our brand. But prospect is somebody who is still in the nurturing phase, probably who has developed some interest with our brand, but still considering whether purchasing a product from this particular brand is worth it or not. Definitely, prospect is also somebody who is considered to be a qualified person for our target market. Let us say in terms of budget, in terms of affordability, in terms of overall profile of the person, it qualifies to to be a customer for our brand. They are a part of our defined target segment. Only thing what they are lacking is they have not yet purchased the product. They have not yet actually contributed any monetary value for our organization or for our brand, but they have high potential of becoming a acquired customers in a later phase of the journey. So, let us dive into this concept of prospect lifetime value. Let us have a detailed look at the how this particular metric is being constructed, what are the different decision criteria based on which we can take a business decisions. So, all these things will be discussed in detail as we run through this presentation. So, let us have a look at this prospect lifetime value. Construction wise, concept wise, prospect lifetime value is defined as the difference between the expected value of a prospect minus cost of prospecting. We need to keep in mind one thing, that prospect lifetime value may not be a high value as compared to customer's lifetime value, because of the fact that in today's competitive business landscape, the ratio of conversion, the conversion rate from prospect to customers are very low. It can be as low as below 1% or sometimes for some of the specific industry it can have a higher value like 10%. But if you look quantitatively, even a small increase in prospect lifetime value can result in higher increase in business value. So, that is why you have to look into details of the prospect lifetime value, and through some of the examples in today's session itself we will show you how even a small change in prospect lifetime value can actually result in a higher business value. Expected value depends on the fraction of prospects who convert. So, if we need to evaluate the prospect lifetime value, one of the important input for this particular metric is called the conversion rate or acquisition rate. How many of the prospects are actually becoming our real customer? Even a small change in that can result in a higher increase in your prospect value. That is one of the important factor that you need to take into consideration, and probably being a business manager you need to take a lot of initiative in order to improve this input. As far as the decisions rules are concerned with respect to prospect lifetime value, that we need to proceed with a business decision or marketing related initiative decisions the moment the acquisition spending is greater, when the PLV value is greater than 0. I mean the expenditure that is incurred in prospecting has to be lower than the prospect lifetime value. That is the value generated from an average prospect, right. So, now let us formally define who a prospect is. A prospect is someone the firm spends money on to acquire as a customer. So, we start with this marketing funnel. We try to make our brand or product aware among the people who are part of our target profile. So, after this awareness phase, the people will develop, some of the people will develop some interest, and who also, let us consider that who has the affordability to make the purchase. So, in that case those people will be considered as prospect. What we need to do with them is that we need to nurture them. One example can be, let us say I took the example of, let us say we are selling a certification program to the people. Then in that case, first thing that, let us say the reach or impressions level may be at 1 lakh and the click through rate is, let us say only 10,000. Now this, out of this 10,000 people only 1,000 will sign up. So, out of this, let us say this 1,000 sign up, we see that only 500 can afford for our certification course, or only 500 are eligible to be a candidate for the certification course. Then in that case this 500 number is considered to be prospect. So, what do we do with them? We basically probably will invite them to look into our website, have a details about our program, or we, let us say we organize an webinar where we invite these 500 candidates, potential candidates. So, what we are doing basically is we are trying to nurture them, we are trying to convert them as a customer for our brand or for our product. But out of this 500 prospects, all of them will not subscribe to our program. Let us say if the acquisition rate, if the conversion rate is 10%, in that case out of this 500 only 50 will subscribe to our certification program, as we have seen in this marketing funnel. So, actual reach was 1 lakh, then click through was only for 10,000, sign up was only for 1,000, and qualified leads which are considered, which are termed as prospect is only 500, and out of this 500, the acquisition, if we consider that the acquisition rate is 10%, then in that case only 50 will be our acquired customer. Now, acquisition, because we do a lot of nurturing to this prospect and it involves a lot of cost, probably organizing an webinar or let us say making telephone calls to this 500 people, it takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of time, it costs a lot of money. Now, what is that expenditure? So, we need to take that expenditure into account when we are calculating the value, possible value that will be generated by nurturing these 500 candidates. Basically, the rule is that acquisition spend must be justified by immediate margin and the long term value from the relationship. Remember that customer lifetime value is calculated as or defined as the future value that can be, the present value of the future transactions for an average customers. In the very definition of customer's lifetime value, we are excluding the immediate margin by the customers. So, whenever we are taking a business decision, we have to amalgamate these two metrics. One is the immediate margin that is occurring in year 0, and another one is the customer's lifetime value that is coming from the future transactions that is happening, that will happen in the future. Good prospecting decisions require full value accounting. How much expenditure is incurred, let us say in broadcasting the advertisement, then how much expenditure is incurred in capturing the data, sign up data, how much expenditure is incurred in making calls to the people who have signed up, and then how much expenditure is incurred in nurturing these 500 prospects. So, all this expenditure that is happening in various phases has to be taken into consideration in order to have a holistic view of the finance of the business, right. So, now just have a look at a simple example. Let us say if acquisition cost is 50 per prospect. So, remember that acquisition cost is calculated as an average, right. So, we will calculate the cost that is incurred for this 500 people in terms of advertisement spend and in terms of nurturing spend. I know this, all these 500 people will not be our customers, but I have to attribute the incurred cost to these 500 people, right. So, that is why if let us say if the acquisition cost is 50 per prospect, and let us also assume that conversion rate is 5% for our business dynamics, and the initial margin plus the customer's lifetime value is 2000 rupees, then what will be the expected value? So, per prospect we are per customer we are getting 2000 rupees in terms of initial margin and customer's lifetime value. So, what will be our overall value? What will be our overall expected value? It is 0.05 multiplied by 2000, because the conversion rate is only 5%. So, conversion rate multiplied by initial margin plus CLV gives you the expected value from a prospect, that is 100 rupees. Now, we have also mentioned that acquisition cost per prospect is 50 rupees. So, what will be the PLV value, prospect lifetime value in this case is 100 rupees minus 50 rupees, that is 50 rupees, which is a good value, because anything positive is considered to be good, fine. So, let us have a detailed understanding of construction of this metric called prospect lifetime value. So, first metric that we will look into is expected value from a prospect is calculated by conversion rate multiplied by the total value that can be created by a customer, not by a prospect now, because we are already taking this conversion rate as one of the input for this calculation. So, expected value from a prospect will be conversion rate multiplied by the total value that is created by a customer. Then what is the cost? Cost is acquisition spending per prospect, the cost that is incurred in terms of nurturing all the prospect. So, we will calculate the average cost of the nurturing. Then what will be our formula for prospect lifetime value? It is acquisition rate. So, acquisition rate is similar to your conversion rate. So, it can be used interchangeably. Acquisition rate multiplied by total value of customers, total value of acquired customer. How total value is calculated? With the summation of initial margin plus customer's lifetime value, which is calculated in terms of retention rate and in terms of discount rate that we had discussed in the previous session. This is the expected value. So, in order to calculate the prospect lifetime value, we have to minus this acquisition spending. And as far as the decision rule is concerned, we have to invest in a proposition which gives us a prospect lifetime value greater than 0. So, if it is lesser than 0, you are certain that you will be incurring losses, right. Now, let us have a detailed discussion, critical analysis about this, how we interpret this prospect lifetime value. One thing we have to remember is that prospect lifetime value is very often, it's a very small value as compared to customer's lifetime value, because of the fact that the conversion rate from prospect to customer is very low. So, even if the prospect lifetime value is smaller, that is okay for us. We have to look into the broader market scenario, broader numbers, like what is the total number of customers. So, all these things needs to be taken into consideration. So, if the number of prospects are more and each of the prospects are giving lesser value also, then also for our business it is okay. Remember that PLV applies to prospect, not to the customers, not to acquired customers. Many small positive PLVs across a large prospect pool can create a large total value. Even if the PLV is smaller, but if the prospect pool is higher, let us say we are getting small margin from each of these prospect, but the thing is that the quantum of number of prospect is very high. In that case, the overall value that is generated for the business is at an acceptable level. If PLV is positive, the acquisition spending is a wise investment. On the other hand, if the PLV is negative, then acquisition spending should not be made, because it will incur you some losses, right. So, now the challenge in front of us is that estimating this conversion rate. This estimation of this conversion rate is not an easy task. Because of this, we are living in a VUCA world. We are living in an extremely volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous world. So, estimating anything is difficult, and when it comes to a complex matrix like conversion rate, the problem is complexified, and we also understand the sensitivity of this estimation. A slight increase or decrease in conversion rate will change the overall value for the business to a higher extent, and that is why it is challenging, but at the same time critical to keep monitoring, right. So, before this one, let me do one thing. Before deducing the conversion rate, a formula for conversion rate, let me do some examples. Let us put our hands into one problem. So, a service company plans to spend $60,000 on an advertisement reaching 75,000 readers. If the service company expects the advertisement to convince 1.2% of the readers to take advantage of the special introductory offer, which is a lower price that the firm makes only $10 margin on its initial purchase, and the customer's lifetime value of the acquired customer is, let us say, $100. So, we need to decide on, is the advertisement economically attractive, is it a financially viable proposition. So, what we have to do? We have to, as far as this particular problem is concerned, we have to calculate the prospect lifetime value, and if the prospect lifetime value is positive, then we can safely say that the initiative is worth, otherwise no. So, in order to calculate this prospect lifetime value, what we have to do? First thing that we have to calculate, first we will calculate the cost of prospecting. What is the cost of prospecting in this case? It is not directly given, but we can calculate it. Total spending is $60,000 and the advertisement will reach to 75,000 readers. So, number of prospect is 75,000. So, cost of prospecting an average person will be $60,000 divided by 75,000, which will give us a value of $0.8, right. So, expenditure part is done. Now, as far as the problem is concerned, the conversion rate or acquisition rate is given as 1.2%. So, value for conversion will be 0.012. Now, what else do we need in this process? We need to understand the initial margin or initial value. So, which is given as $10, because it is a special introductory price where the company is making just $10 from the initial transaction. And what is the customer's lifetime value? That is $100. So, total value that can be created by a customer is $10 plus $100. So, $110. But the conversion rate from the prospect to the customer is 0.012. So, 0.012 multiplied by 110 minus the cost of prospecting, that is 0.8, is the prospect lifetime value as far as this problem is concerned. Look at this. So, PLV is equal to 0.012 multiplied by 110 minus 0.80. So, it is giving us a value of 0.52. So, in this example, the prospect lifetime value is as low as 0.52. Now, what is the total expected value from this scenario? Though the prospect lifetime value is 0.52, there are 75,000 prospects as far as the scenario is concerned. So, 75,000 multiplied by 0.52 will give us a total dollar value of 39,000, and probably 39,000 is not a, 39,000 of profit in a way is not a bad proposition to go with. That is why the proposed acquisition spending is economically attractive. So, as I said earlier that the biggest challenge is estimating the CLV, because it needs longer term projections. We are predicting the future behavior of the acquired customers, which is extremely complex in nature, because we are talking about human behavior, and human behavior evolves over a period of time. The problem is complexified in the sense that even the market dynamics will not stay constant. So, even the market will evolve, the person will evolve. That is why it is extremely difficult to predict the future behavior of our acquired customers, right. So, if the acquisition rate is uncertain, that we have already mentioned, it is extremely sensitive. Acquisition rate or conversion rate, it is extremely sensitive metric, but at the same time it is extremely uncertain. So, what do we do with this uncertainty? If something is extremely volatile and uncertain, in that case, let us be pessimistic in order to evaluate a business proposition. So, what we will try to do is that what should be the minimum conversion rate in order to break even the business scenario. So, when can we break even the business scenario? When we can make this prospect lifetime value 0. Neither we are incurring any loss nor we are deriving any profit. So, that is the break even scenario. So, we will deduce an equation to calculate this conversion rate or acquisition rate, so that the proposition is actually breaking even. So, how can we do that? We have to make the PLV value 0, right. So, let us deduce this equation. So, we have to make the PLV equal to 0. Now, how are we defining the PLV? Prospect lifetime value, it is acquisition rate, I will put it as AR, multiplied by initial margin plus CLV, right, minus acquisition spending. I will put it as AS. So, this should be equal to 0. So, what will be my acquisition rate? Acquisition spending divided by initial margin plus, right. So, this is a simplest form of equation. So, your acquisition rate should have a minimum value of acquisition spending divided by total value that is expected by an acquired customer, right. If you are getting a minimum value of this one, so that many customers, that many percentage of customer prospect you have to convert. Anything below that is actually resulting in a loss for for your business, and anything above that is resulting in your incremental profit, right. So, this is how we can actually decide on the minimum acquisition rate. So, we have to keep a focus on this minimum acquisition rate, and probably we need to intervene with marketing initiative in order to reach at this acquisition rate. Now, what are the biggest challenge in monitoring this prospect lifetime value? First thing, because one of the input associated with prospect lifetime value is customer's lifetime value. Estimating customer lifetime value is the hardest part, because it is predictive in nature. We are forecasting something, and what are we forecasting? We are forecasting the human behavior in future. We are forecasting, we are predicting something called a retention rate, the percentage of customers who will stay with us for the next year. We are also making some assumptions on what will be the transactions value that will be made by an average customer in the future, and that too in a VUCA world, that too in a dynamic and evolving business scenario. So, the problem is complexified from multiple dimensions, and long term projection introduce the risk. Risk is means it is uncertain. The let us say if I am assuming something from next year, then probably up to some extent I am somehow convinced, because the evolvement in terms of customer or evolvement in terms of the market dynamics will not be at a higher extent. But if I talk about 10 years from now, I do not know how the business scenario is going to be even 5 years down the line. So, long term projections are always critical, and it is associated with more uncertainty. right. Now, let us have a look at prospect lifetime value metric for lead scoring. So, what we have to do, it is like dividing the customers or dividing the prospect. Score prospect by response probability. Who are the prospect? Which segment of prospect has a higher conversion rate? And which prospect segments will actually generate more CLV? So, those things, those categorization has to be done. What we have to do? We have to target the highest PLV leads, where the conversion rate is higher, where the CLV values are higher. So, we need to keep a focus on them, so that overall business value that is created from this initiative is optimized. And this particular initiative, this particular actions, it aligns sales and marketing effort with the expected value. Another important aspects is that we need to keep monitoring the PLV value over time. It is extremely difficult, it is extremely complex to keep the predictions static for a longer period of time. As I said, human behavior evolves, market conditions evolves, that is why we need to keep updating our values. We need to keep updating the value associated with the important metric, such as update the acquisition rate assumptions. So, what is the acquisition rate? So, we cannot keep it, let us say 5% across the time frame. Rather, let us say as far as today's market condition is concerned, we can fairly assume that the conversion rate can be 5%. But let us say 3 years down the line, let us change this value. It can be 3% because there is more competition in the market. So, it is not wise for us to assume that the conversion rate will be 5%. It can get reduced, and sometimes in rare cases it can get increased also. But depending on the current analysis of the market, we need to keep changing these inputs. And similarly, we have to update the CLV assumptions. So, what are the CLV assumptions? The assumptions related to retention rate, the assumptions related to discount rate, because there can be a change in the overall economy as well, not only in the market. So, discount rate is somehow related to the inflation. So, if there is a huge change in the economy, the inflation rate can change, your repo rate can change. So, all these things have to be taken into consideration, and that is why everything is not within your control. So, it is always wise to keep the metric values updated, keep the input values updated. What we have to do is that, what we have to keep in mind is that PLV must evolve as markets, competition and retention changes over a period of time, in order to keep updating the actual business scenario with respect to the actual business environment, with respect to the actual customers' evolving need and requirements. Now, we will summarize this metric. PLV links acquisition spend to lifetime value, right. So, by the definition or by the construction of PLV, we are relating the acquisition spend to the lifetime value. So, both these two metrics, that is customers lifetime value and acquisition spend, are inputs to PLV, that is why we are relating each other. It basically helps us in preventing the cheap but low quality acquisition. So, there can be some acquired customers who are easy to acquire, but their lifetime value is smaller. So, that is why probably it is not worth it. What PLV does as a whole at its surface level is that it ensures you acquire customers who generate net value over its lifetime, right. So, I would like to conclude this session on prospect lifetime value by saying that if CLV is a value, PLV is a decision. Invest only when the value beats the cost. So, PLV is a metric which is directly related to our decision parameters. Thank you. I will see you in the next class.